One, Donald Trump's asking for it. He was wearing his skirt too short. He just wouldn't shut up. And that's why there was a second attempt on his life. That's what we're told. So let's analyze the case of Donald Trump's violent rhetoric. Did he create the atmosphere that leads to assassination attempts? 2, Michael Shellenberger on being hunted in Brazil and the deteriorating state of free speech, not just in Brazil, not the UK, not Canada, but the United States of America. 3, you, the militia. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Hitting subscribe on Apple or on Spotify. Streaming live. At least that's the plan. Every Monday through Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time on Facebook and on YouTube. I get the sense we might be having some trouble today streaming live, as I'm not sure our video feed is reaching out to the audience today. I don't know if the guys in the control room in New York are panicking or if they can tell me what's going on, but our boys in New York are missing their fearless technical leader, two-a-days. Dan is off because he's getting married. He's joining the crowd of the betrothed. And he's going to go away for his wedding, and he's going to go away for his honeymoon. So that brings us to the boys in New York, where we are now streaming live. Our video feed is up on YouTube and on Facebook. Are you nervous, Justin? I'm asking you to pull your camera up, increasing the technical difficulty. We shoot out of the gates.
We are good to go, Will.
With a placard. What would you put today? Justin is on his maiden voyage here on the Will Cain Show. What would you put your nervousness scale, 1 to 10? Where are you on this first trip with the Will Cain Show? 4.87 on the nervousness scale.
Nice and specific, yeah.
I appreciate that rating. Well, I'm glad that you're not too nervous. You missed some of my fancy camera work as I'm becoming the director of the Will Cain Show as well, bringing you around the studios in Dallas, Texas. But now we're up, we're running, we've crossed the threshold. We've got the Willish, we've got Tinfoil Pat, we've got Young Establishment James, and we don't yet have a nickname for him, but if he's going to be with us over the next week and a half, we're going to have new guy Justin filling in for 2 days. So now that I have forced the issue, broken the seal, maybe he's on camera, he's had to talk, he's had to adjust a few camera movements, maybe Justin's ready, because we're going to throw a few things at him today as we work our way through some of the biggest stories, including bringing in guest Michael Shellenberger. Today, he is an expert on free speech. He has a Substack, Public, and in fighting the battle for free speech, Michael Shellenberger has been on the front lines. He has experienced government prosecution in Brazil. How far away are we from that in America? Jump into the comment sections on YouTube. Jump into the comment section on Facebook. Let's bring you in today to the Will Cain Show. But first, let's prosecute the case. Let's take the argument. We're told Donald Trump has created a climate of violence, and now he is reaping the whirlwind. He's asked for it. So let's prosecute the case against Donald Trump with story number 1. CNN, The View, mainstream media. We are told that Donald Trump for years has built a climate of coarseness, of extreme rhetoric, and in fact, a climate of violence. And that today, after the second attempt on his life, he cannot look up and claim victimhood. I could play for you the clips where they will explain this is not a both sides issue. Certainly, they will not take responsibility for the rhetoric on their side in calling Donald Trump a demagogue, a would-be dictator, in calling him a threat to democracy, in calling him a threat to the soul of America, in calling him a threat to the world, and calling him literal Hitler. No self-reflection on that. In fact, not even a willingness to say tone down the bipartisan rhetoric. Instead, no. This is Donald Trump's fault. I give you Whoopi Goldberg.
Part they're knowingly misleading and where the truth is.
And also, let's stop this thing. Let's stop this both sides stuff.
It's a bunch,
because it's not correct. Right. It is not both sides. It is one clear side. And you can point to many, many reports. You can point to all kinds of stuff that's been reported. You guys have to pull it back. This is not us or them. This is you got to stop doing what you're doing, JD, and what you're doing, Mr. T, because you are not helping the situation. We'll be right back.
You got to stop what you're doing, JD, and you got to stop what you're doing, Mr. T, Donald Trump. So, before we get into the obvious evidence of the climate of violence that's been created toward Donald Trump, let's take the proposition. Let's take the case. Has Donald Trump created an environment that he ultimately cannot control and engulfs the threat to his own life? Let's prosecute the case against Donald Trump. Our intrepid producer, Tinfoil Pat, put together a list and did so by doing something I have not yet learned to utilize. I always feel insecure about the word utilize. Why did utilize replace use? A tool that I've not yet learned how to use, artificial intelligence. He went to Grok, the X artificial intelligence, and said, give me the examples of Donald Trump's violent rhetoric. Grok churned out 10 examples that could be used to illustrate the climate created by Donald Trump. I wanted to walk through those 10 examples with you quickly here today and see if it stands to reason, to see if Whoopi Goldberg has a point, if this is, in fact, Donald Trump's skirt being too short. He created the opportunity to assassinate Donald Trump. Here is the top 10 reasons that Donald Trump has created this environment according to Grok. Number one, the lock her up chant. During the 2016 campaign, Trump encouraged chants of lock her up against Hillary Clinton, implying a desire for his opponent to be imprisoned, which many saw as an indictment of political violence or incitement of political violence, or at least a call for punitive measures outside due legal process. Now this, I don't fault Grok, because Grok's job here is to survey the landscape of arguments made by the left about Donald Trump and the climate he has created. I do not think this is a valid piece of evidence. Lock her up was not an incitement to do something outside of due legal process. That was an argument made that Hillary Clinton had broken laws, many laws. And some of that we know, for example, retaining classified emails on unclassified servers, unsecured servers, violation of federal law. Same kind of thing, in fact, they attempted to lock up Donald Trump for in the classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago. No, in fact, the lock her up chant was simply rhetoric, where in fact the lock him up movement was an actual process with multiple legal cases looking to imprison a political opponent. I don't think this is creating a climate. I think that was a call for what many could say was due justice, and what more was simply words compared to the actions of those on the left. Number two, Second Amendment remedy. Trump suggests that if Hillary Clinton was to appoint Supreme Court justices, the Second Amendment rights would be under threat, implying that gun ownership might need to use their weapons, which was interpreted by some as an indirect call for violence. Weak. He suggested that a Supreme Court justice appointed by Hillary Clinton would threaten Second Amendment rights. Now, first of all, I don't know how that extends into an argument that those rights would be protected, in fact, by the Second Amendment, but that is a constitutional, not just argument, that's a constitutional truism. The purpose of the Second Amendment has nothing to do with home protection, self-defense, or hunting. The purpose of the Second Amendment is a protection against government tyranny. That's a fact. That's not violent rhetoric. That's the constitutional founding. If you find that incitement, then you do find, and you may give an argument to this belief, that the Constitution of the United States and the founding fathers were, in fact, well, I guess, revolutionaries? Number three, roughing up protesters. Trump has commented on protesters at his rallies, suggesting or appearing to condone physical violence against them, like when he said he'd like to see them carried out on a stretcher. On this, I will suggest there's some credibility. Back in 2016, Donald Trump often talked about this, about protesters at his own rallies. As with anything with Donald Trump, I want to hear the exact cut. I want to hear the clip. I don't want to hear repetitions of it from AI or a supposedly objective journalist. I want to hear it with my own ears. But I did hear some. I'd like to go back with fresh ears and listen to what he had to say, but I'm not going to reject this one. That's, at a minimum, a coarsening of our political opposition. And in fact, if you're saying carry them out on a stretcher, that is not a climate of peace. Number 4, the stand back and stand by comment. During a political debate, when asked to condemn white supremacists, Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, which was taken by many as an endorsement or encouragement for potential violent action. This, I think, is slightly above weak. It's weak because Donald Trump has a long history of, honestly, imprecision and sloppiness in his rhetoric. He says things, sometimes, as we pointed out in the debate, that are half sentences and half thoughts without completing in an effective manner his point. And this kind of goes back to that truism of the left takes Donald Trump literally, but not seriously. The right takes Donald Trump seriously, but not literally. I do not think he was telling the Proud Boys, which, by the way, I do not think as well is a white supremacist organization. There are people of many races who belong to the Proud Boys. But regardless of who they are, I do not think he was calling for them to be ready for violent action. I think that he was sloppy in that moment. And his rhetoric should not be taken literally. Number 5, retribution and vengeance. Trump's campaign rhetoric in 2024 often includes themes of retribution and vengeance against his political enemies, which, while not directly calling for violence, sets a tone that could be interpreted as encouraging a violent response from supporters. Now, this is just thematic. This is someone else. This is a game of telephone. This is echoes in a canyon. You know, you're thematically saying, you're not giving specific examples of retribution and vengeance. And I would have to go through those because I trust no one in their hearsay about something said by Donald Trump. But I've paid pretty close attention to him. And while he said, whoa, the left has weaponized the justice system, and we might have to look at, within the due process of the legal system, use of the justice system if they're going to use of the justice. And while he said that, which, if not rational, is a pretty human response to it being done to him, I do not think this is a good example of creating a climate. Again, when it's literally been done against him, not just in rhetoric, but in actions, I do not think this is an example of Donald Trump creating a climate of violence. 6, describing opponents as vermin. Trump has used dehumanizing language by referring to some of his political opponents as vermin, which historically has been used by leaders to justify violent actions against groups they dehumanize. Again, I would have to hear the exact clip. I've heard that repeated, that he called somebody vermin. If that's the case, like somebody he just disagrees with, they're vermin. I would submit that is a coarsening and very oppositional. I don't think it leaps to violent, but it's not good if he's called simply political opponents vermin. Again, I want to hear the exact clip. I do not trust hearsay on what Donald Trump has said. But between take them out on a stretcher, roughing up opponents, or calling simply opponents vermin, I will give you 2 that rise above the level of weak examples. Number 7, bloodbath comment. Although Trump later claimed this was taken out of context, his mention of bloodbath, if he didn't win the election, was seen by some as a violent threat should he not return to power. Beyond weak, an absolute hoax. This is a hoax. He said there would be an economic bloodbath in the auto industry if Kamala Harris, then Joe Biden, if Kamala Harris were elected president. Hoax. Number 8, January 6th rhetoric. His speech before the January 6th Capitol riot, where he told supporters to fight like hell and repeated the election fraud claims, was seen by many as an incitement leading to violent events of that day. This is weak. I saw Jen Psaki in an interview, I believe it was, with Elizabeth Warren this week after the second assassination attempt of Donald Trump, saying fight, fight, fight is, quote, scary. Fight like hell and fight, fight, fight are absolutely not invocations, not incitements, and not creating a climate of violence. We talk about fight in sports. We talk about fight in your personal life. We use the word fight often as a illustration of one's effort to win. Fight, 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 fight like hell, weak. Number 9, dehumanizing immigrants. Trump's references to immigrants, especially from Mexico, as criminals and rapists, along with suggesting shooting migrants in the legs or using military force, contribute to a rhetoric that can incite violence against immigrants. Weak. He wasn't talking about all immigrants from Mexico. He wasn't talking about all illegal immigrants from Mexico. What he was talking about is they do not send us their best. That's what he has said. And that, again, is a fact. That is truth. We know, for example, just as for an example, the proliferation of Tren de Aragua, the violent criminal gang from Venezuela that's showing up in Aurora, Colorado, El Paso, Texas, New York City, and Wisconsin. We know that, you could go back dating to the 1980s with the Cuban boat lift, that when refugees and migrants often get flooded into our country, the country from which they're flooding pushes certain people to a new land, helping their homeland out by getting rid of criminals, and in Donald Trump's words, not sending us their best. Using military force to enforce the border, please, again, it's the duty under the Constitution. This is weak. And number 10, threats against legal system. Trump's attacks on judges, prosecutors, and the legal system, often accusing them of being corrupt or biased against him, while not directly violent, undermine trust in institutions and could indirectly encourage violent reactions against those figures or institutions. Oh my God. Is there something between weak and hoax? Okay, so you criticize those who are persecuting you legally and now you're inciting violence? Well, okay, what about Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, everyone on the left, continually dehumanizing, demonizing the Supreme Court of the United States? Is it just some institutions you're allowed to criticize with very, very evocative and impassioned rhetoric? Or is it all institutions? Like, criticism of institutions is seemingly the very foundation of America, from the citizen to the press. That's the idea, speaking truth to power. And if power is being used against you, you're not allowed to criticize that power unless it comes off as you're inciting violence. That's 10 examples of Donald Trump, according to Grok, creating a climate of violence that has led to the whirlwind coming back on him. And what I would suggest, two at most. If there's more examples, you can jump into the comment section on YouTube or Facebook and let me know. I'll bring you into the show. Here are the best examples you have of Donald Trump creating an environment that supposedly has led to 2 attempts on his life. That versus what I think is an open invitation by continually calling him a threat to everything, from our democracy to our soul, from America to the world, a threat. And here we are, from the podium of the White House press secretary, within days of the second attempt on his life, and you're offered this once again, this time from Karine Jean-Pierre.
How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president and the vice president and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat?
Peter, if anything from this administration, I actually completely disagree with the premise of your question, the question that you're asking. It is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it, because American people are watching. And to say that from an administration who has consistently condemned political violence.
That is appalling. She had just got done giving another answer to a different reporter about how Donald Trump remains, and they've said it very clearly, she said, a threat. She once again describes him as a threat. What do you do with a threat? You neutralize a threat. And then when Peter Doocy from Fox News has the temerity to question her on doubling down on that rhetoric, she says, how dare you ask that question? How dare you? In fact, you are becoming a threat with your questions. Oh, you're a threat, all right. Yeah, we're a threat. You know what we're a threat to? The maintenance of continued and monopolized power. People often say, like Whoopi Goldberg, broad brush strokes. I can give you many examples of Donald Trump creating this climate of violence. Well, today, what I've tried to do is give specificity to that echo, give specificity to that generalization, take you up on your case, Whoopi, and walk through what you say are many examples of this climate. In my personal judgment on your case, denied, overruled, thrown out of court, versus continually, as evidenced by the actions against him, putting a target on the back of Donald Trump. Let's talk about this, plus the status of free speech, not just in Brazil, but here in the United States of America, with someone who knows very well. Michael Shellenberger, coming up on The Will Cain Show.
The world of business moves fast. Stay on top of it with the Fox Business Rundown. Every Monday and Friday, Fox Business reporters, anchors, and hosts will bring you beneath the stock market speculation and boardroom drama to tell you about the biggest business stories of today. Whether you're on Main Street or Wall Street, Fox Business is invested in you.
Listen to the Fox Business Rundown every Monday and Friday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
Jalen Hurts leads the Eagles against the Saints. Then, in America's Game of the Week, Lamar and the Ravens take on Dak and the Cowboys.
Touchdown, Dallas!
It's a huge doubleheader, Sunday at 1 Eastern on Fox. Check for the game in your area.
We're bringing the thunder to football. Fox Weather is storming the field with the risk of weather impact on the hottest NFL games this season. Listen to Storming the Field every Friday on foxnewspodcasts.com. The world of business moves fast. Stay on top of it with the Fox Business Rundown. Every Monday and Friday, Fox Business reporters, anchors, and hosts will bring you beneath the stock market speculation and boardroom drama to tell you about the biggest business stories of today. Whether you're on Main Street or Wall Street, Fox Business is invested in you. Listen to the Fox Business Rundown every Monday and Friday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
Your comments are coming in. You're giving me examples, in your estimation, of Donald Trump creating a atmosphere of violence or a climate with coarsened rhetoric. I'll bring you in, the Willisha, momentarily here on The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com. It's also on the Fox News YouTube channel, on the Fox News Facebook page, on terrestrial radio across the country. If you're listening or watching, you can always be with us here on The Will Cain Show by hitting subscribe on YouTube. Hitting subscribe, not just to Fox News on YouTube, but the Will Cain Show on YouTube, a separate page underneath this live stream, which is streaming on the Fox News YouTube page. There is the Will Cain Show YouTube page. You go over there, you hit subscribe. If you listen to us, you can subscribe on Apple or on Spotify. We'll get to you, the Willisha, your comments momentarily here. But for now, we have Michael Shellenberger. He's the author of Apocalypse Never and San Fransicko. He also has the Public Substack. You can also find it at public.news, and I always love having him here on the Will Cain Show. What's up, Mike?
Good to be with you, Will.
Mike, I don't know how long you were hanging out, if you heard me listen. And listen, man, for you and the audience, one of the things I try to do, in my broadcasting career is, look, I don't want to be partisan, because partisan is predictable and partisanship is hackery. But I'm honest about my biases. Like, I have my philosophical leanings and how they manifest into candidates. I want to be honest with the audience, because you don't get truth without that level of honesty. I just analyzed the case made against Donald Trump. Has he reaped the whirlwind? Is he creating a climate of violent rhetoric that is blown back on him now? That's the argument made by many. I just gave the examples of Karine Jean-Pierre and Whoopi Goldberg. And I find the case very, very wanting. That's not to suggest that Donald Trump has always been, the purest of angels in his political rhetoric, but I don't find calls for violence. And I don't find him certainly rising to the level of even those who continuously described him as a threat or as Hitler. And so I'm having trouble, Mike, seeing it as sort of a both sidesism and an either or, and everybody needs to tone it down. Maybe everybody does. And I don't want to be partisan when I say this, but it's like right now there's one man whose life is in jeopardy. And right now there is one example of a style of rhetoric that is way out in front of anything given as an example against Donald Trump.
Yeah. Is that the pause where I should jump in?
Yes.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think, look, I have my criticisms of Trump too. I mean, I think that he had a chance after that first assassination attempt to really finish the narrative arc and for him to kind of rise above. I mean, I won't say who, I was with someone who's very progressive, a Democrat, who was there the first night of the Republican convention with me. And you saw him get a little misty-eyed. He seemed soft. There was even this ad that they were running that I've never seen again, which was sort of this animated ad with Trump. I'd never seen it as a kind of a cartoon, and it was sort of a softer side of Trump. And he didn't complete that arc with his speech. He kept interrupting his own speech, his acceptance speech, kind of going back to a kind of bitterness, which I thought was disappointing because I thought it could have been a moment where he would have been like, look, I almost was killed. It renewed my faith in God. He's, ostensibly a Christian. And of course, the central teaching, at least for me, of Christianity, of course, there's many, but for me, the central thing is love thy neighbor. You've heard it said you should love your neighbors. Love your enemy. You've heard it said you should love your neighbors and hate your enemies. I say unto you, you should love your enemy. Such a radical teaching. It's the most Christ-like, one of the most Christ-like things you can do. So I'm disappointed that Trump didn't do that. And I think it would have been great for the country had he done it. I think it would have been good politically. I'm not a political consultant, so I don't know, but disappointed he didn't do that. But I agree with you. Like, there's the rhetoric and then there's just what are people doing? I mean, in this effort to stop Trump, look at what they've done. I mean, I'm now comfortable saying very explicitly that the FBI and the CIA interfered in the American elections in 2020 with the Hunter Biden laptop. It's not a theory. This occurred. Mark Zuckerberg just confirmed another detail of it in his letter to Congress a few weeks ago. That's illegal. That's unconstitutional. That's why we have a democracy. We don't want our police officers, our intelligence agencies engaged in politics against the American people. We've also seen this censorship industrial complex gets created after the Trump election. We saw a manipulation of intelligence. We think the evidence is very strong. Matt Taibbi, Alex Gutentag, and I reported that they manipulated the intelligence assessment. These are things that Trump did not do. For whatever else you think of him, he did not censor his opponents. And then, of course, the final thing is the effort to put Trump in prison, to incarcerate him on, let's face it, absurd charges. The trumping up, so to speak, of the felony charges by the New York court in particular, supposedly around fraud. It's just the 36 supposed felony. It was a complete manipulation of what the intention of that law was, and certainly grossly disproportionate to whatever harm, really no harm caused by those violations. So I think what you're seeing on one side, for me, is a guy who's 79 years old, who's rough and tumble, comes out of a rough and tumble world of development. He speaks in a crude way. He says crude things, some of which I don't like. He did say poisoning the blood of the people, which I don't love. That's any language around poisoning blood is ugly and has an ugly history, and I condemn it. At the same time, the people that are really weaponizing government, censoring, engaging in lawfare, it's all on one side. And those are totalitarian tactics. And so for me, I see one side that's engaging in a kind of totalitarianism, which is characterized by at least three things. The first is the hunt for heretics. The second is this kind of whole of society effort to stop your political opponents, this cancel culture, the government censorship, the lawfare. And then I think this other part of it is, and this is from a Polish psychologist, that the sense of entitlement and grandiosity on the part of these government bureaucrats to interfere in elections and to engage in this kind of disinformation and censorship like we saw in Hunter Biden. So So that would be my summary view, Will, of how I see it. I agree it's not equal. There's some things I would like to see Trump rise above on, but certainly this move towards totalitarianism, I mean, it's crazy, it's deranged, it's dangerous, it's unconstitutional, it's un-American, it has to be wholly condemned, has to be investigated, and we've got to get beyond it. And I fear what happens if these things are never properly investigated and exposed.
A lot to dig into in that first opening answer from Michael Shellenberger. I'm just going to bounce around my curiosity on different angles of your initial answer. So I'm going to start with this. Let's talk for a moment about poisoning the blood. Now, here's why I want to bring that up. I agree with you about the choice of rhetoric, okay? Because poisoning of blood is tied in a metaphorical way to race. It is tied in a metaphorical way to individual human anatomy. It's suggesting inherent characteristics of various people. Now, here's why I bring that up. Okay, here's a comment that I've already gotten today here on the Will Cain Show. Rick McDonald says, very small ask. Can you Trumpers quit your racism against Haitian Americans? Now, this is tied to, Mike, the conversation around Springfield, Ohio. Now, are there examples that can be brought up of someone saying something to make this an issue over race? Perhaps. I don't think this is an issue over race, what's happening in Springfield, Ohio, where this just is an objective fact. I don't know. It's tens of thousands of Haitian refugees being deposited into a town of, 50,000, over under 50,000 people in Springfield, Ohio. And I thought about this topic when I thought about you, Mike, because this is what it's about, I think. It's not about race. It's about culture. And culture and race are not one and the same, okay? They're not. If you want to make the argument they're one and the same, now you are the one walking us down, the proverbial you, Mike, not you, but you are the one walking us down the path of race being inherent to culture. But there are all kinds of cultures across the world, and they're not of equal value. They're just not. Okay, if that sounds controversial, I just say, okay, well, what about infant mortality rates, healthcare, literacy rates, what embraces of free speech and first principles? Not all cultures embrace these, what we would all describe as universal goods. Not all cultures embrace them equally, leading us to not all cultures are equal. And the reason I'm talking about this now, and I reject somebody like Rick McDonald saying this is racism against Haitian Americans. No, it's a deeper conversation about culture. And can you dramatically and radically impact a culture like that of Springfield and Ohio without huge societal cost? And here's where it comes to you, Mike. As a guy who's lived in San Francisco and written a book about San Francisco, I just feel like on many levels, you're looking at a microcosm of a radical shakeup in culture.
Yeah, well, this is why I love talking to you, Will. I mean, I love your podcast because this is an important thing about podcasts because you can actually take the time to unpack these things and get into it. And this is obviously this massive issue. So, as context, I should say, I've lived in a lot of other countries, or I've spent a lot of time in other countries. 17, I was on the radical left. I went to Nicaragua when I was 17, was with the Sandinistas. I've been to Africa, Central Africa. I've also spent time in Germany. And, a lot of your perceptions of these places have a lot of truth to them. Like I go to Germany and everything works. Like it's incredible. Or the Netherlands. Like it's just incredibly efficient. The proverbial trains are on time. Just these little details, food, infrastructure, civilization at this super high, tight functioning level. And the Germans, a little uptight. Like if we're being honest, like, the famous Robin Williams joke, Robin Williams was like talking about being in Germany and they were like, how come there's no good comedy in Germany? And Robin Williams says, did you ever consider that maybe it's because you killed all the funny people, and it's a controversial joke at the time. It's still funny. There's some truth to that. I mean, here you have this incredibly rational, scientific, organized, tightly wound society that is the peak of enlightenment. I mean, it's Kant, it's, Beethoven, Bach. I mean, it's incredible, and they produce this horrible war and genocide kind of some people think the worst thing humans have ever done whether or not you think it rises to that status, obviously a horrible thing comes out of this really enlightened society. Is super tightly wound. You go to places like Central Africa, Brazil, other, poorer parts of the world, and things are not as well organized, not as tightly wound, and the people are so warm and generous. They'll invite you into their home, they'll cook you a meal, they'll literally give you their shirt off their back. There's so much to be said for so many of those cultures, and certainly plenty of violence as well. But I do think, to your point, the things that go into making civilizations run smoothly are not specific to any culture or race. Hard work, having clear laws and following them, having independent judiciary, having cheap energy, equal justice under the law, meritocracy. These are the pillars of civilization, without which you have crime and violence. And so you let up on those pillars just a little bit, like in San Francisco. Oh, well, if they look like they're, mentally ill or have a drug problem, then we won't enforce the law, or we will not enforce the laws against shoplifting up to $950, or we'll let people camp on the sidewalk, or we'll let people deal drugs publicly. It just immediately, it doesn't take much. I had the director of security for Denver, brilliant young man. I say young, he's in his 30s. He said to me, he goes, Mike, the bottom line is you'll get what you allow. So if you allow those kinds of behaviors like you see on the streets of San Francisco, or the disorder that you might see in places like Haiti, like Latin America, like some parts of Africa, if you allow those things, you'll get them. So it's not specific necessarily to any of the cultures. Certainly people will follow norms, but I think the thing that we have done so well in the United States compared to Europe, compared to any country that's ever existed, is that we have assimilated many, many different cultures. We are a mongrel country. We're a country that assimilated many cultures. At the same time, we have a culture, we have a civilization that definitely comes from Western Europe. And so these attacks by the radical left and the woke left on civilization, and by extension on Europe and on Eurocentrism and on white people and blah, 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 all of that is, an attack on kind of the most special thing about the country. So we've managed to do two things at once. We've had a civilization that respects the pillars of civilization, advanced upon really what they were able to do in Europe. I mean, just look at the censorship that's going on in Britain right now. The United States said, no, we're going to have this really radical free speech culture. We're not, speech comes before government, and we're going to assimilate all these different cultures from around the world. So I guess I'm agreeing with you, but also acknowledging that, I think the brilliant idea of America, the United States, is that you can have a civilization. You have to defend those pillars of civilization, and you can have assimilation. But if you stop trying to assimilate, or if you give up on those pillars of civilization, then it's going to become disorder.
So I like so many things you said there. So first of all, cultures are not like human beings. I have a friend that always talks about, I'm a big believer that in your individual characteristics, your strengths are also your weaknesses. Like as an individual, uniquely to you. Yes. I think you can probably find your weaknesses in the same place where you're looking at your strengths. And no one's perfect. And the same thing can be said about cultures. Like you talking about Germany versus Africa. We can see the pros and the cons of German culture, not even going back to the 40s. Today, you could look at German culture today and say, here's what's good about the culture, and here are the shortcomings of that culture. And you can do the same thing with Africa. You can do the same thing of any culture. And that measurement that we do kind of is where we weigh out which culture is better, which culture is worse. Second, you said America has a culture. That's the thing that's constantly denied. We don't have a culture. That's just simply not true. To me, that's like David Foster Wallace, the famous writer, talks about, two fish swimming past each other and one fish saying to the other, how's the water? And the other fish goes, what's water? You don't know something when you're immersed in it. You don't know there is an American culture until you can get out of the water, go somewhere else, see a different culture, and then you realize, oh, there is such thing as American culture. And then thirdly and finally, the idea then, now to take it to, in this case, Springfield, but Springfield as a microcosm of America, is you have to retain your culture. So whenever I do agree with you, the experiment's awesome. Like, What was the idea of America? Well, we have this foundational culture, to your point, pillars of civilization, and then we take from the best of everybody else coming in, and we adopt and we integrate and we melt it together so that we end up with the best of all cultures. But that takes foresight. That takes purpose, not unfettered illegal immigration, not radical change to Springfield, Ohio, and not radical change to the United States of America. San Francisco, to your example, is an example of undercutting the pillars of the foundation of this culture. Springfield is an example of completely, radically watering it down and not asking for some level of purpose or assimilation.
Yeah, 100%. And even on the, like, if you go to Boston, which is a super progressive Democrat city, they still protect these particular norms, these, you could say Western European norms, but also law and order. They don't allow the kind of things that they allow in San Francisco. So you do see even a difference in culture, which is really a difference in norms and law enforcement between East Coast Boston and West Coast California. People complain about New York, Manhattan, and I'm always like, okay, there's some stuff on the edges, but compared to the chaos in San Francisco and Los Angeles, there's no comparison. So yeah, the other thing I think keep in mind, so I don't know, I haven't reported out on Springfield. I am interested in looking at it. My understanding is that, yeah, there were some people brought in, but it was also some chain migration. There were Haitians coming to the United States. I think when you interview most immigrants that come here, particularly those Haitian immigrants, they're going to say they want to be in the United States. They don't want to be in the chaos and craziness of Haiti. They're coming here for a reason. There's still going to be some cultural differences, but I think the thing we should not forget is that we want people coming from around the world to the United States as immigrants. I want them coming legally, not illegally. You want them to follow some rules. You want them to work hard. That's a really important American value. Work hard, play by the rules. You should have insurance. You should be able to afford a home. You should have a retirement. That seems very basic to me. And you don't want to be taking in people that are not going to work. You don't want to take in people that are criminals or sociopaths. That seems also, fundamentally basic. So yeah, are people being racist around Springfield? I'm sure some people are, some people aren't. This issue of assimilation is absolutely maybe one of the most important issues, certainly when it comes to immigration, maybe one of the most important issues in the future of civilization overall. Getting back to Germany, right. They do a terrible job of assimilating. So do the French, and the Europeans don't do nearly as good of a job as we do. We're in a position, I'm in California, the Latinos, which is, Mexicans, Central Americans, Latin Americans, we call them Latinos, we call them Hispanics. They are assimilating. Basically all the evidence is we had this terrible idea in California at one point where we were going to not require Latin American immigrant kids to learn English in schools. That was terrible. That was a dumb woke idea. We got rid of it. Immigrants come and generally it's often harder for that the immigrants themselves, but their kids, they go to school, they learn English. We know how to do this. We intermarry, there's a kind of mixing there, but you do protect this core set of norms and rules and culture, which includes, working hard, playing by the rules, obeying the law. You don't want those things to become degraded. And I think that I do blame the radical left, the woke left, for confusing these things with suggesting that somehow asking cultures to follow the laws and the norms and to assimilate, that's somehow racist. That's absurd. Obviously, right. It's not. Every country in the world should want their immigrant populations to assimilate. And that doesn't mean becoming Christian necessarily or whatever, but it does mean, these kind of basic things. Obviously, you see South Asians, Indian Americans, maintaining their Hindu values, Jewish Americans maintaining, their Jewish, Catholics, whatever. That's kind of a big part of the country is that we're going to have, people from different religions and different cultures. But there's a set of norms and rules and laws that everybody is expected to follow. And any effort to chip away at those things, even the smallest things like you see in California, kind of go, oh, well, maybe we should reduce the penalties for supposedly minor crimes. It creates chaos. You just can't allow people to be going into stores and shoplifting. It's obviously, gone way too
Right.
far. And hopefully, and I will make a plug for it, anyone in California, vote for Prop 36, because it's going to actually restore some of that law and order and those rules. But yeah, I think it's helpful, Will, the ways in which we're attempting to kind of unpack here, what parts of this, might be prejudice and what parts of it are actually essential to having a functioning society.
Well, let me tie it together then, because I think this goes into a bigger issue, which you're on the front lines of. So people often point to the United States' embrace of free speech, and the first thing they reach for is the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. What I would suggest is the First Amendment of the United States Constitution is the final straw to protect free speech. That you, having lived across the world, know this. We're unique not because of the First Amendment. I mean, we are unique because of the First Amendment, but that's not all. It's because of our cultural embrace of free speech. And that's a geographic outlier. That just doesn't exist in other places like Canada or the UK. People don't believe, in the saying, I despise what you have to say, but I'll defend to my death your right to say it. They believe, shut up. That's misinformation. That's hate speech. And we don't have hate speech in America. And we didn't in the past have misinformation. But we're culturally, there's a clear shift going on in America when it comes to our cultural embrace of free speech. And it manifests not just in the people listening or that might feel at times like yelling, shut up, but Tim Walz saying, misinformation and hate speech are not protected as free speech. That's misinformation, by the way. They are protected. Or Gavin Newsom with this newest thing in California, which you can speak to, Mike, where, you post something that is a deep fake or I don't know, even parody and memes, and he's proposing it's illegal in California. We're losing our cultural embrace of free speech. And once we lose culture, we'll lose the legal fight for free speech.
Yeah, gosh, so much to say there. So first of all, I am the CBR chair of free speech, censorship, and politics at the University of Austin. I'm now a professor. I'll be there January through March. But I am a newcomer in many ways to free speech and First Amendment issues. I've been on a steep learning curve for the last, year and a half since we did the Twitter files. There's so much to say about it. But so first of all, the First Amendment was totally radical. Like, it turns out, it's just, and you really learn it when you go around the world and you realize how many more speech restrictions are in other parts of the world. Like, it was the anti-federalists, the people that didn't really want to have, a unified United States. They kind of begrudgingly accepted the creation of the United States. The first thing they wanted to do after they ratified the Constitution was they were like, we got to have a First Amendment that protects free speech. I think it's important for people to know, for the United States, speech comes first. You have speech, and then you create the government. The government doesn't give you permission to say things. In basically every other part of the world, particularly Europe, it was more like the king decides what you're allowed to say, and you may petition him and ask whether you can say these things. And so speech was sort of gradually achieved. Here it was like, no. The First Amendment is written in this really absolute way, and then the Supreme Court, over a couple of hundred years, carved out some exceptions. You can't lie to steal people's money, that's fraud. You can't lie to destroy someone's, career or life, that's defamation. You can't immediately incite violence, immediately being the key thing. That's the Brandenburg versus Ohio test of 1962, reaffirmed in 1978. But very radical, and just like you said, Will, you're totally right. And everybody agrees on this, like all the historians and scholars and sociologists. If the people don't support free speech on the First Amendment, then it's just not going to matter. Like, you have to have the culture of supporting free speech. So these kinds of conversations are essential. You have to fight it out in court, but you also have to get out there and, moralize, frankly, make the case for free speech. And, one thing I thought, because I'm a Gen Xer, born in 71, I always doesn't everybody just intuitively know that we believe in free speech? The answer is no. You actually have to learn it. And I do remember when my father told me that the Supreme Court upheld the right of Nazis to march through not just a neighborhood of mostly Jewish Americans, but Holocaust survivors in 1978. I remember being horrified by this because I was very woke, young and sensitive. You're like, that sounds horrible. Why do we allow that? And my dad kind of explained it to me. I think it probably took me a while, but we were taught why free speech matters. We were taught why you could not possibly make it illegal for people to lie. Everybody would be in prison. You could not possibly make it illegal to make fun of people or to have parodies. I mean, the whole history of this country, the 18th century in particular, our founding fathers were really nasty. I mean, you got to look back at the things they would say about each other. It was crazy. And so, of course, we have this tradition that goes, okay, well, somebody lies about you. It's awful. How did it happen? You go out and you say, that's not true. And here's why it's not true. And that's how you deal with that. So this crazy bonkers law in California, which is almost certainly going to be ruled unconstitutional, probably will go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know. But it's just obviously like how, I mean, it's so funny because it's like they go, okay, so parody is now illegal. What about Saturday Night Live? Or what about comedy? Now you could say, well,
Right.
but if it's obvious, if it's really misleading or whatever, well, you correct it. Like you have community notes on X, or you have people replying on X. I think it's been working really well. Community notes, not perfect. But this idea that the government's going to get there and decide and ban these things, I just think, yeah, it's just like you said, it's like you've got a bunch of, and this is the totalitarianism. In other words, one of the great theories of what is totalitarianism is basically that it comes from the most dogmatic and intolerant people of society that are out there hunting down heretics, heretical thought, whether, conservatives or libertarians or heterodox people or classical liberals, that these totalitarians they just can't stand it. They're just so sure of their rightness that it's like a kind of intuitive emotional reaction. They've got to make you shut up. And that's Gavin Newsom, that's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, that's Hillary Clinton. They're just so full of self-righteousness and certainty that they're out there to shut the rest of us up. And I think it's important for us to say that's not the American way.
That's really good. First of all, I want to give an appreciation to you and color in for the audience. You bring up Brandenburg. This isn't, I went to law school, but I did. I went to law school. And so there are certain things that stick with you. For example, I don't just always remember all the intricacies of tort law, but I do remember the Brandenburg test. And just the reason I'm saying this for the audience is you're going to hear this often. And you'll hear it from the highest levels of government, that the limits on the free speech embrace in America is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's just simply not true. That was one point was a example given in a case that has since been overrode. Which, by the way, you can yell fire in a crowded theater. We want you to if the theater is on fire. But the test is later. I believe that was a 1930s-ish decision, the fire in a crowded theater. The test is, I thought it was 69. You said it was 62. But Brandenburg versus the United States, which is the limits are direct or immediate incitement to violence. And that was brought up in the January 6th stuff, like, did what Donald Trump say amount to a direct or immediate incitement of violence? And historically, I believe it's pretty much got to amount to this. Go get him, boys. There he is. Go get him. Now my speech is not protected, right? That it's got to be that obvious and that extreme. So I just wanted to underline, because that's really educational for people out there to understand the limits of free speech. But the other part of what you had to say is good, is I get it. Like, we're living in the world of AI and deepfakes, and it's hard to know what's true. And Mike, I'm super skeptical, and I'm super skeptical on X, and I do love X. But I see so much stuff now, and I'm like, I don't know if it's true. And I get the plight of people. Like, how do we help people understand what's true? And the answer to that can only be more speech, because there's no omnipotent person to put in charge. It's certainly not Gavin Newsom. And the guilt. The guiltiness within them, Clinton and Newsom, okay, there's some of those are just craving for the power. But to me, it's just a lack of humility. I think it is the underlying flaw of progressivism, honestly. It's a lack of humility. Like, you're not good enough to be the arbiter of what is true. I'm sorry. Neither am I, by the way, in case you think it's personal. I'm not good enough to be the arbiter of truth. I just do my best to arrive through a process at the truth. And that's why I own my biases. And so you're not good enough to run a healthcare system. You're not good enough to run an economy. You and all your big brains aren't good enough to control the climate. And you're not good enough to ascertain from high on the mount what is true. And that's the flaw. The flaw is the total lack of humility, Mike.
Well, 100% agree. And yes, thank you for the correction, by the way. You're right. Brandenburg is 1969. It's not 1962. And so we just proved there's no need for some government committee to come in and correct me. You did, and I acknowledge it. And yeah, so gosh, so much you just said there. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, let me say a couple of things. Okay, let me give an example that I've been obsessed with. And my colleague and co-author, we've been debating whether I should try to go out and correct it. So there is somebody on X named Jeremy Kauffman. Let me call you out right now, who's part of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party. And the New Hampshire Libertarian Party posted on X something like, Kamala Harris, if somebody assassinated Kamala Harris, she'd be a national hero. The New Hampshire Libertarian Party deleted it, and Jeremy Kauffman posted on X a video that has now been retweeted something like 50,000 times, viewed like tens of millions of times, of 2 FBI agents coming to his house to apparently ask him about this tweet. And I saw it, and I reached out to Jeremy. We follow each other, and I was like, what was the context of this? And he didn't tell me right away that it was about that tweet. And he said that tweet would have passed the Brandenburg test. And I don't know if that's true, maybe. But he did take it down, or the New Hampshire Libertarian Party took it down. But I think that the video that he posted is totally misleading and irresponsible. So I may not end up writing about it, but I'll denounce this, with you here. He should have said that the FBI was apparently concerned about a potential threat against the vice president. I have written dozens of articles criticizing the FBI for abuses of power. I think the FBI is a mess. It needs to be cleaned out. It needs a new director. They need to fire the psychopaths and narcissists that are weaponizing the FBI for political purposes. I have very strong views and strong words about the corruption of the FBI. Because of that, because of my concern, it is irresponsible to be accusing the FBI of abusing its powers when it's not. I think actually I agree that when somebody makes a threat or suggests a threat against a political official, they should be investigated. Like, that is reasonable. It is illegal for anybody to threaten violence against anybody in the United States. That is one of the limits to free speech. Could that be abused by the FBI? Absolutely. Could the Secret Service abuse it? Absolutely. But I think we all have seen, given the threats against the things with Trump, that they actually haven't done a good enough job in investigating these threats and in protecting our elected officials. So I think it's wrong to go out there and suggest the FBI is abusing its powers when actually, in that case, it appears to have been doing its job. So I mention that because I do think it's important to call out that kind of bad behavior when we see it. I don't know if it's worth me doing a whole article about it, but maybe I satisfied myself by just mentioning it to you. On your other point, I also 100% agree. I think it is this demand, this totalitarianism, this demand for censorship, the desire to weaponize government agencies to engage in lawfare and incarcerate your political opponent. It's coming from hubris, which is one of the oldest sins, not just in Christianity, but in prior pagan religions. Remember, it's Icarus. It's this attempt to behave like gods. It is a way of saying we're humans, we're fallible, we're not like gods, we're not omniscient, we're not omnipresent. There's limits to what we know. We make mistakes, we're fallible. We ask for forgiveness, and we're aware of that. And we're also in Christianity, we're actually, some of the central teachings are understanding our own wickedness, our own flaws. Jesus says, you're so quick to see the speck in somebody else's eye, you don't recognize the log in your own eye. So I totally agree. I think that impulse to hunt down heretics, that self-righteousness, fundamentally stems from a lack of self-awareness and a lack of humility.
All right, last thing with you here, Mike. Telling me about Brazil. So I understand. So Brazil, outlaws X through their legal mechanisms of whatever. You have to have a local agent. Elon wouldn't do the local agent thing, so X gets outlawed. Keith Ellison, by the way, Minnesota AG under Tim Walz, says, "Obrigado, Brazil." Thank you, Brazil. But I understand you went to Brazil and you've suffered some consequences.
Yeah, I mean, really, the whole thing starts because I was invited to speak at a free speech meeting in Brazil. We had done several pieces on the censorship in Brazil and we've been working with 2 journalists in Brazil. They asked me again before I came down, can you please see if there's any Twitter files Brazil? I had looked before, couldn't find anything, but then I did find stuff and I published it. 3 days later, somebody asked Elon, someone that's blocked, a Brazilian who's blocked in Brazil, asked Elon if he would please unblock them. And Elon says, we're going to release these files and show because the censorship demands are so extreme. That was back in March. I was criminally investigated at some point. You're like, do I take this seriously or not? Because it's so absurd. But I was criminally investigated. The police did 2 separate reports. And then the Attorney General of Brazil recommended that I be prosecuted for having written completely accurate and legal Twitter files Brazil. So I was a little worried about going back to Brazil. Certainly, some people in my life didn't want me to go, but I did feel like it was important to go and take a stand against this person that's basically acting like a dictator. And I did. And on Saturday of last week, a week ago Saturday, I was there on this huge sound truck in the middle of Sao Paulo, and there's like several 100,000 people around us, and it was one of the most beautiful, inspiring experiences of my life. I gave a little talk, a little speech to rally everybody up, and finally yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre, said that I think we can overstate it, but basically criticized the Brazilian government's decision. There's now going to be at least 2 pieces of legislation introduced yesterday, hopefully today or tomorrow, in Congress with multiple co-sponsors condemning what Brazil's doing. The biggest risk is that this kind of thing becomes normalized and people see it as okay to just ban an entire social media network in Brazil. We have to keep fighting and not let it go. Because I do think that's how it kind of creeps around the world, that governments suddenly kind of go, oh, well, Brazil got away with it. Maybe we can get away with it here. So, we've got to fight. That's why I think a lot of people go, well, I don't care about Brazil. I don't live in Brazil, or, that's their problem. But it's actually, that is one of the ways that pro-censorship people, including in the United States, hope to get censorship here, is you start to get X banned in all these countries around the world. And the next thing you know, and I don't think Elon would, but certainly I think, Meta and Google might, they kind of go, well, we'll just go ahead and censor it for everybody for a variety of reasons. It might be easier or politically expedient. And then suddenly our internet is controlled by the government. And that is at that point, we're well into George Orwell's 1984.
I think to illustrate your point of the creep, the Attorney General of Minnesota, thank you, Brazil, for what you have done. Does that not show an appetite to do that in America? All right, we're glad you're free back in America. Michael Shellenberger, always great to have you here on the Will Cain Show. Public.news, Public on Substack, Apocalypse Never in San Francisco. Great to have you, Mike. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you, Will. Thanks, man.
All right. Awesome conversation with Michael Shellenberger right there. Check out either of his 2 books or the reporting he's done, which we just got some good journalism there when it comes to that FBI visit to New Hampshire Libertarian Party representative, which you can check out at Public. All right, you, the Willisha, your comments. I said I want to bring you in. You can push back on my monologue today or anything we've said. Let's hear from you next on The Will Cain Show.
It's time to take the quiz.
5 questions, 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
History, pop culture, science, sports, civics. How much do you know? Let's find out.
Who was the first person to walk on the moon?
Jackson or something?
Neil Armstrong.
Take the quiz every weekday at thequiz.fox and then listen to the quiz podcast to find out how you did.
Play, share, and of course, listen to the quiz right now at thequiz.fox.
Jalen Hurts leads the Eagles against the Saints. Then, in America's Game of the Week, Lamar and the Ravens take on Dak and the Cowboys.
Touchdown, Dallas!
It's a huge doubleheader, Sunday at 1 Eastern on Fox. Check for the game in your area.
We're bringing the thunder to football. Fox Weather is storming the field with the risk of weather impact on the hottest NFL games this season. Listen to Storming the Field every Friday on FoxNewsPodcasts.com. from the Fox News Podcast Network.
I'm Emily Campagno, and this is the Fox True Crime Podcast.
And I had nothing to do with her disappearance, but people still accuse me of it.
I sit down with the people who lived the nightmares.
I was in shock. I was just devastated.
The investigators who tirelessly worked on the case.
I feel for their families, and I really hope that they can catch this guy.
Bringing you closer to the story than you ever thought possible.
Listen and follow now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Man, we got to get back to some sports at some point. I was on today, the Ricky Cobb Show on Outkick. You should head over there. We hear us break down Texas Longhorns, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, Dallas Cowboys, and more over there at the Ricky Cobb Show. But this is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, outkick.com, the Fox News YouTube channel, the Fox News Facebook page, and just hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or go find the Will Cain Show and subscribe on YouTube. Comments on Facebook and YouTube we bring into the show, and I laid out my case of what is the examples. We went through 10 from Grok, examples of Donald Trump creating a climate of violence. I found them all, excepting 2, rising nothing above the level of weak. But I asked you, what have I missed? What do you think? So here we bring in the Willisha. All right. Mariska Maselli says Donald Trump faced criticism during his 2016 presidential campaign based on the aggressive atmospheres of many of his rallies, where tension and intimidation repeatedly spilled over into violence. Now, this, I believe, is a reference to protesters showing up. Aggressive atmosphere, very, very vague and generalized term. But confrontations at the rallies between protesters, disruptors, and rally attendees, yes, that did happen. Now, to the extent there is a confrontation, is that the product of the protester, the rioter, the disruptor, the rally goer, or the speaker on the stage? I think we have to do a little better, Mariska. Good Riddance says, hello, my name is Clifford. Please do not vote for Donald Trump. Thank you. Okay, Good Riddance, you just made your way onto the Will Cain Show. On the comments section here on YouTube. Eric Miller says, don't people realize that both parties contribute to all the problems? By having a constant state of rhetoric, nothing ever changes, all while those in power keep getting richer. I think there's legitimacy to that point. No one's an angel. Neither side is pure. So, of course, there's a pox on all houses. That doesn't make it equal. You know, that doesn't, as we just talked about with Michael Shellenberger, I do think there is some really dangerous stuff at this point coming from the left, manifesting in not only the attempt on the life of Donald Trump, but as laid out by Shellenberger, actions taken to advance a totalitarian state by dividing the people. Divide us. Tell us everybody's racist. Tell us MAGA is a threat to the soul. All the while, give me more power. Keep me at the top of the totem pole. Cal Vidian says, when Trump says he hates Taylor Swift, it is political violence, and some will take these words as an incitement to violence against that person. No, Cal, no. I mean, you know, I don't think that was smart, by the way, Donald Trump. I hate Taylor Swift. He put that out on Sunday before somebody tried to kill him. It's not smart. Like, why? What's the net upside? You know, a lot of Swifties. So, like, see the downside. What's the upside in saying I hate Taylor Swift? But among the downsides, I don't think it's an incitement to political violence. Patty Garriga says, I hate Taylor Swift as well. Is my saying that inciting violence? I mean, I'm trying to think which musicians I hate. I actually don't use the word hate very often. It's just so far. There's a lot I don't like. So is the line between don't like and hate, like, I will bet you a lot of people listening have a lot of times they've said, I hate this movie, I hate this actor, I hate this actress, I hate this song. Is that all a call for violence? Frida Jasper says, let's start birtherism. She's talking about Donald Trump questioning the birth origins of Barack Obama. And if Frida jumped on the show right now, I would just ask this, okay? You can criticize, we can talk through that entire issue. But why, even if you win every argument, Frida, really, honestly, if you win every argument, why is that creating a climate of violence? Why, perhaps ridiculously, let's just grant that, questioning the birth origin of Barack Obama equate to political violence. Could you explain that to me? If we were together here now, could you explain that to me, Frida? Teresa Lucas, I was always told when you point the finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. Whoopee from The View. And then Jeppy Anderson says on YouTube, did the Founding Fathers think the Constitution included free speech, but it had to be reiterated in the First Amendment? That's a fascinating point, Jeppy. Here's what I would say to that. There's a deep debate, and we've touched on it a few times here on the Will Cain Show, whether or not there was a necessity for the Bill of Rights, which includes the First Amendment of the Constitution. Because the idea is the Constitution of the United States, through its articles, laid out the powers of the government, explicitly said, this is what you are allowed to do. The Constitution wasn't a limit on the people, it was a limit on the government. And by enumerating and explicitly laying out the powers of the government, the implication was, if it's not listed here, you do not have the power. Now, when the debate was won to incorporate the Bill of Rights, those that did not want a Bill of Rights said, you're flipping it on its head. What you've done now by saying the government shall not infringe on free speech or freedom of religion or freedom of association or the right to keep and bear arms. By saying you are not allowed to do this, you flip the presumption. And if it's not listed here, the presumption is now, well, the government can do it. So while the Constitution is a limit specifically on the federal government, we could have ended up with a system where states could have limited free speech. And because of the incorporation clause in the Constitution, the states have to abide as well by the United States Constitution. But the Bill of Rights specifically included free speech, at the same time sacrificing the presumption of an unlimited power of the federal government beyond what is prohibited. It's a fascinating debate. We're well past it. And now we're all embracing the Bill of Rights, and we should, because we're well past it. But it is a seminal moment in defining the limits of the power of the United States government. All right, that's your comments on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be back again tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern time on YouTube, on Facebook, always on radio, on Spotify, on Apple. Love having you in the show, and we will see you again next time.